Well, it has been such a fantastic year for the Motor City. I mean, you got the Detroit Lions who made it to the NFC Championship. You had the NFL draft in Detroit, which was immaculate, and everybody had an amazing time. The only thing we hope that they could get together is the Detroit Pistons and the Detroit Red Wings. But nonetheless, we're going to be talking a little bit about baseball because it's baseball season, folks. So joining us talking about the Tigers, I got Jake Riepma here with us. So I got to say, I mean, everybody in the city of Detroit, I mean, they are feeling absolutely amped up. The Lions are right now building a lot of relevance, and they're looking a lot better. We had the NFL draft. So, I mean, the city of Detroit, they're building up for something pretty interesting, I'd say, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it, Jake. Thanks so much for having me on. And if we could just fast forward to football season, I'd probably be in a lot better mood. But having to put up with my 500 baseball team that wins a couple of games, loses a couple of games, and you get all excited about Tarek Skubal and you think, wow, maybe this team can show us something. Then the offense rears its ugly head and you get shut out, and it seems like every game. So it's a love-hate relationship with the Detroit Tigers right now. And if you follow them every day like I do, it's not good for your health because you feel like you're a little bit, up and down and a little bit erratic, and some would even say bipolar by the way this team is, because there are good days, there are bad days, and everything in between. And the frustrating part about it all is the pieces are there, Jake. I really do think this is a baseball team especially when you look at the rotation that this organization has built, you can win with this starting rotation. Tarek Skubal, obviously one of the best arms in baseball right now, what Reese Olson's been able to do, and the one-year deal, and Jack Flaherty, man, has he shown out. So those are three really good starters right there. The problem is the other pieces just haven't really lived up to their end of the bargain, and that's where you get a 500 baseball team. It's up days, down days, and everything in between.
I just felt like initially when A.J. Hinch got the job, I mean, ultimately it was an unfortunate fiasco, all that happened, in Houston. And I felt like, and I've said it like years ago, I was like, that is the one person that had enough of the balls to come out and say, like, yeah, it was a tough time, but we knew it was a mistake, and he owned up to it. So I thought it was right giving him the second chance. So since the time being and right now, I felt like he was right for the job because he could build a lot of really good future stars that could make Detroit a lot better, a lot more consistent in the AL Central. So, like, from the beginning of where we are now, how do you kind of feel and where do you figure things will go with manager A.J. Hinch, the way that this whole roster has been building up from the farm system up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a lot of different ways to look at his tenure as a whole as the manager of the Detroit Tigers, because I certainly hear, in one sense that here's a guy, AJ Hinch, looking for a second chance, and everything that transpired after the World Series championship with his Houston Astros team and the tainted legacy. Here's an opportunity for him to rebuild that in a market like Detroit that, don't get me wrong, they love their teams, and there's a thirst for a winning baseball team, but there's not the pressure like there would be in a major market team like a New York or like a Houston Astros team. And so I think it was a soft landing spot for AJ Hinch. And depending on who you ask, the media isn't going to be the type of media that's pressing him day in and day out. And AJ Hinch has had several instances where he kind of commands the clubhouse post game, and he does some things that are a little bit unconventional. Bullpen management is an example of that. He doesn't believe in having a set closer, and that can lend itself to some questions, and rightfully so, whether it works out or whether it doesn't. But the fact of the matter is, AJ Hinch has led a baseball team that's been below 500 since he's taken over as the manager of the Detroit Tigers. And for years, the first couple of years of his tenure, it really was a rebuilding organization with, to your point, some young core players that you're trying to build around, some early draft picks, the Spencer Torkelsons, the Casey Mize of the world, that just really haven't panned out to this point in their career. And I don't know if you put that all on the manager per se, as much as the organization as a whole, their inability to develop position players. Now, they developed some young arms, and I'm going to sound like a broken record before this is all said and done, but the pitching staff has been great. Some young arms that you really could be build around as far as, focal points of your franchise moving forward, but there just hasn't been that same development of position players outside of the pitching staff. And the bullpen was really, really good to start the season this year. And I hate to look at, I think you asked kind of as the whole tenure. So it's I don't want to put everything into this one season, but here we are in the month of June. It's a 500 baseball team. And you look at the AL Central is expected to be a really bad division, but out of nowhere, the Cleveland Guardians are one of the best teams in the AL, and the City Royals are playing really well as well. So instead of, I think someone made the comment that if the Tigers could have just hovered around 500 at this point in the season last year, they'd been a couple of games out, but now you look up and they're 10.5 games out of first place in the AL Central. And it feels like it's another year of maybe not even rebuilding, but just kind of meddling along in mediocrity. And in my opinion, I'm probably a little bit more overly critical than the average person you talk to around this team. But I had really high expectations, high hopes for A.J. Hinch's tenure as the manager of the Detroit Tigers. And you give him a year, 2 years, and even a 2.5 years as a grace period. And I really had high hopes for this particular season, especially when you consider how good the starting pitching's been. And to be a game under 500 at this point in the season, I guess you'll take it, but it certainly isn't what I had hoped the A.J. Hinch era would amount to, if you will.
Yeah, and that's why I'm like, I have really good high hopes that, A.J. Hinch will figure this thing out. And then at the same time, I just look at the front office. I look at, the farm system, the building of a lot of these prospects, because here's the thing. There are teams out there that live for projects, and then one that they ain't got no time for projects. And they want to buy all these, star players. So Miguel Cabrera retires. One of my favorite players I love watching. Good God, from his time in Florida and what he left with the Detroit Tigers. Amazing career. That is humongous shoes to fill. But Spencer Torkelson right now, a top draft pick, hasn't lived up to the expectation on a rough start. And now he's being optioned. So looking at him, what have you speculated and what could potentially be some changes? Maybe it's somewhere where it's either, confidence in the box, whether it's, maybe some mechanical things. What have you basically gotten out of the Spencer Torkelson thing?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And to back up before I get into the Torkelson stuff, I'm with you with Miguel Cabrera, one of my all-time favorites. And the Triple Crown years, those were my formative years in sports. And it's fun to reminisce, but make no mistake about it, Miguel Cabrera handcuffed this organization the last 2 years, maybe even 3 years of his time as a professional player. He was a shell of himself, and it's going to go down as one of the worst contracts in baseball history, the latter portion of it all, because this organization had no choice but to play him the last 2 years of his career. And again, I'm the biggest Miguel Cabrera fan, but I think that needs to be at least that caveat needs to be added as some mismanagement by this organization. And furthermore, with Spencer Torkelson, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it, because you take a player 1-1, and what I mean by that, the first round, number 1 overall pick as a position player, man, you've got some high expectations, and it comes with the territory. And so Spencer Torkelson, when he initially, made his way into the major leagues as a big leaguer, he's under the microscope. Fair or unfair, it comes with the territory. And this is a guy that just struggled in a lot of different aspects hitting wise, but still showed some promise and still showed the ability to have extra base power. And especially last year, the latter portion of the season last year, and in particular down the stretch in the month of September, he was as good of a hitter in the middle of the order as anybody. He was mashing extra base hits. And so you think just timeline wise, hey, here's a guy who finished really, really strong last year, entering his third season this year, again, going back to being a number 1 overall draft pick, really, really high expectations. And in 2024, he just hasn't figured it out. I mean, he's looked lost at the plate. He pops a lot of stuff up, and, you put that on maybe the hitting staff. But at some point, there has to be an accountability factor. And I think A.J. Hinch, to make it about A.J. Hinch, got sick of answering the Spencer Torkelson questions, and not saying that's the only reason he was sent down, an option to AAA, like you mentioned, but a reset, a complete turning of the page, and hey, let's try AAA. Let's get back to what we know you can do. And to his credit, he has mashed in AAA. And now the baseball mind in me gets a little bit worried, because now you think maybe this is a guy who just can't hit major league pitching and is a really good AAA hitter. And that's a scary thought that, hey, we drafted this guy out of Arizona State, number 1 overall, and he can just hit the cover off the ball against bad pitching in AAA. But when he gets up to the big leagues, he just looks lost at the plate. So the only thing I will add to that is there's a little saving grace, is that even though the contact numbers were bad, the average was bad, the OPS was bad, any analytic was bad, other than the fact that when he barreled up a baseball, he still had the ability to do extra base damage. And there was even a portion where he was leading the American League in doubles well into the month of May. And so again, he's striking out a lot, he's popping out a lot, but every now and then when he barrel up a baseball and run into it, he would do some extra base damage. So that's the glimmer of hope I'm holding on to. And again, he has, to his credit, mashed in AAA. So maybe when that time comes to get him back with the major league organization, get him back sporting the old English D, he'll have the ability to have that confidence that was instilled in him in AAA and get back to that hitter that he was in September of last year. And again, that's the kind of the puzzling part of it all, is because he has shown the ability to be really good at the major league level, albeit for a small sampling size of the end of last year. It just hasn't come into fruition here in 2024.
Now, it is interesting because we are in the month of June, and usually, like, there's 3 months of summer, and you're enjoying it. You're kind of evaluating all the pieces you have to potentially seeing, is this a team that can go on a bigger run? Or is this a team that we need a little bit more? We need some more capital. We need whatever we can get. Now, we know that the trade deadline would be coming up next month. Now, I look at Detroit, and I'd say this could be a potential destination to maybe pick up some utility guys. I look at Mark Hanna. I look at a couple of other pieces. And to be frank with you, I'm waiting until this divorce between Javi Baez and Detroit this just looked like it was a disaster contract from the start. And I think he's kind of coming down to earth after winning a championship in Chicago. So how do you kind of see this play out, knowing that, as someone who covers this kind of team, knowing the build, knowing the prospects that they're trying to basically build up and maybe accumulate more, when you come to a trade deadline, what do you expect from the Detroit Tigers? Are they going to is it possible that this team might take some phone calls?
Yeah, Jake, I wish he had 2 hours, because I would scream into this microphone for 2 hours about how much I despise Javi Baez. We have a thing on Locked On Tigers postcast that every fifth show or so, at least once a week, I have to say something nice about Javi Baez. And it just pains me to ever say anything nice about Javi Baez. And maybe it is personal, but I just can't stand the way he plays the game. And it's fitting you're having me on today, because he went on the 10-day injured list. So for 10 days, I won't have to say anything nice about Javi Baez. But I said Miguel Cabrera, the latter portion of his contract was one of the worst in baseball. I lied. It's the Javi Baez contract. And if Chris Ilitch had any stones and management had any stones, they would just cut the cord, chalk it up as a loss, buy him out. And I don't know what, I'm not a numbers guy. I'm not a great math guy, but 70 something million, whatever it is. He's the highest paid player on the team. He's making 25 million this year. He has, and this is not even hyperbole. This is not an exaggeration. He could go down as the worst OPS position everyday starter if he continues this pace. So, and I know, I'm sorry you asked a couple of different questions about the trade deadline, but you brought up Javi Baez, so I had to at least give you how I truly feel about Javi Baez, and that is going to go down as one of the worst free agent acquisitions in baseball history, because he wore out his welcome in Chicago. And I don't want to do a Javi Baez history lesson, but everywhere he's been, he's worn out his welcome. He wore it out in New York, and it didn't take long to turn on the fans in Detroit. And everybody has a different opinion on this. I was at opening day, and I was booing the heck out of him, because that's what fans do. And he gets paid a lot of money to be a really bad baseball player. And some fans will say, oh, he's one of ours still. We got to cheer him on. And when Javi Baez is sporting the Old English D, it is a sad, sad day in the Motor City. So until that divorce, I can't remember how you put it, but you put it perfectly. Until management decides to move on from Javi Baez, I think, and maybe again, this is too strong of an opinion, but he has that negative effect on the Detroit Tigers as an organization. And I don't think there's 29 other teams wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole at this point in his career. Now, as far as the other pieces that could be on the move, a lot of conversation in the Motor City about Tarek Skubal, because he would demand an absolute king's ransom in return. Teams like the Baltimore Orioles, who have a loaded farm system, in particular position players that would be willing to make a deal for a guy like Tarek Skubal, who can help them go on a run and have World Series aspirations. Depending on who you talk to, obviously the Tigers aren't quite there. So it is a pivotal trade deadline coming up. And I think either way, whatever this organization decides to do, it will send a clear message to the fans, to everybody that covers this team, whether they're in and out. And I'm not saying there's a right answer. You could certainly make the case that, hey, this is a 500 baseball team, and you've got the best arm in baseball, and you lack position players. So now is the time to make that deal, get a king's ransom in return, get 4 or 5 can't miss prospects, and start the rebuild. Or you could make the case, which, if I had to be honest, the fanboy in me comes out a little bit. I'm more in this camp that, hey, this is a starting rotation that you can build around. You're a piece away from competing. You're only 2.5 games out of a wild card spot right now in the month of June. And as bad as the offense has been, if you can add a piece with this starting rotation, for sure, with 4 out of the 5 guys, you've got a chance to win day in and day out if the offense can put up some runs consistently. So go make a move, and let's try to make the playoffs. Anything can happen at that point. But if I had to bet what I think this organization will do, knowing Scott Harris, his comments on MLB Network all season long have been pretty telling. He's still in the development process. He's still in the rebuilding process, which is just like fingernails on a chalkboard for me and for other fans to hear, because this team has been rebuilding for 12 years, and the fans deserve better. They really do, because this is a once proud organization that went from having a top 10 payroll in baseball when Mr. Ilitch was the owner of the team to now has a bottom third payroll with Chris Ilitch running the team. And so, and I'm not oversimplifying it by saying, hey, if you have a top 10 payroll, you're invested in winning, and if you don't, you're not. But there is something to be said about the investment that the organization is willing to make. So I'd love to see them go pay Tarek Skubal, go pay Jack Flaherty, pick up a bat at the deadline, and see what can happen if you can snag a wild card spot. And then anything can happen when you're in the postseason. I honestly don't think that will happen. And there is a case to be made in trading Tarek Skubal for the boatload of prospects you could get in return.
And I could tell you what, though, come on and invite, Dan Campbell down, because all we need is a little bit of grit, Nat, and I think that could help.
That'd be great. I wish sometimes A.J. Hinch would embody some of those Dan Campbell characteristics, because covering the team, and I was in the clubhouse more last year, but every now and then it'd just be so frustrating because A.J. Hinch he lacks some of that charisma that we all love that Dan Campbell has.
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking at the developments, and like you put it on, it's been 12 years of basically, draft and develop. And so they're trying to get to the best that they could possibly be, because I've seen the Tigers at its best and I've seen the Tigers at its worst. And even times when I would see them like middle of the pack. So when you think of guys like Akil Baddoo and Riley Green, and I'll give you one, and I actually played high school baseball with him, that's currently in the Tigers organization in minor league ball. A name for you, Bly Madris. I played with the kid. He's got some really good upsides. Love him as a left-handed batter. And the guy, I'm hoping I get a chance to see him in the majors again. So we know we got the College World Series going on. There's a lot of really good prospects that's out there when you think of pitchers and when you think of some potential powering lineup guys. Has there been some prospects you kind of kept a solid eye on, knowing that you got the MLB player draft that comes up? What's kind of the focus that the Detroit Tigers have, knowing we got the College World Series right now going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good discussion point. I think baseball, more than any other sport, it's a little bit of a leave it to the scouts ordeal. The draft is so long; you draft so many guys, and then I mean, the Tigers are a great example. Last year, they draft Max Clark, and yeah, can't miss prospect, but he's gonna take 3 years to get to the bigs, whereas the Rangers, the defending World Series champion Texas Rangers, went a different direction, drafted Wyatt Langford, and he's in the bigs now. And so for me, again, and from a fan's perspective, I think selfishly you're looking for that, that collegiate level player that can make an impact sooner rather than later. But the Tigers in their history have shown they're going to draft minor league, or they're going to draft kids out of high school and develop them. And so if I were to bet, that's probably the direction that they'll go. But either way, make no mistake about it, this team has to exhibit the ability, has to show that they can draft positional players, develop them, and eventually have them make the show and be productive players. I mean, I think of a guy like Jace Jung, one of the more recent college players that they drafted. He still hasn't cracked the bigs yet. Out of Texas Tech. So it's an interesting discussion. And truthfully, I won't. To be full transparency, I'm not well enough versed in the development process of the draft from a baseball perspective with this organization, other than knowing that they definitely need position players throughout the organization and in the farm system. So my guess would be that would be the focus and the approach in this upcoming draft.
Yeah, interestingly enough, and like I said, I mean, compared to, the NFL draft, I mean, I'm getting a player that's ready to play right now,
Right.
whereas you look at the MLB draft, it's going to take you at least, 2-3 years max at least to finally get them to the potential that they want to be in, so that this way, this organization can now kind of move the needle toward the right direction to make them competitive, make them more relevant and such. So a side note before letting you go, I mean, the City Connects, I absolutely loved a lot of these jerseys, and there's some of them that I'm just like, couldn't we have gotten a better decision than that? But I mean, I look at Detroit's. Don't tell me that don't give you a Detroit Pistons kind of feel when I look at Motor City, and I'm like, I mean, these look pretty cleanly. How did you think of that with these City Connect unis?
Funny you ask, because it's kind of just like the tires. It's a roller coaster. At first, I thought, we missed the mark on this. I feel like it was kind of the cop out. Hey, let's design a Detroit jersey, slap Motor City on it, call it a day. And I was hoping there'd be some orange in it. I just felt like that was more representative of the Detroit Tigers. And then, you get into the detail, the old patch on the side with Highway 1 and the Woodward. Highway 1 was a cool tribute. The VIN number on the hat, sure. I think they could have done a little bit more with it, to be honest. I did get adult softball jersey vibes from it when I first saw it with the all navy blue. And then they started to play really good baseball, and they started to win some games. And so I thought to myself, wear whatever you want if you're going to win some games. But I also think it's an uphill battle, because the white home uniform with the Old English D is you just can't beat it, in my opinion. So you are already fighting an uphill battle trying to not replace, but add to what I deem probably the best jersey in baseball, outside of some of the, the ones that you can't argue and some of the classics. But the Old English D, the white one, white uniform at home, is as classic as they get. And the old expression of, if it's not broke, don't fix it, is kind of how I looked at it. But I understand. I like the City Connect uniforms. I like the idea and some of the tributes on it. Again, the old Woodward highway patch on the side with the number 1, and then it had the 313, the VIN number on the hat. There's some neat parts to it, but I gave them when they first came out, I gave them a C-. So still passing, but didn't blow my socks off. So Jake the Snake, I know you're a big fan of them, but I think they left some to be desired on my side of things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, hey, if they're winning games up on it, like the infamous Torrey Hunter would basically say, if you look good, you play good. And if you play good, hey, they're going to guarantee they're going to pay you good. So,
There you go.
so yeah. And, final thought, because I know the AL Central, I mean, you nailed it on the head with the fact that, the Cleveland Guardians, I mean, I can't figure that team out because the fact that like they're trading pieces left and right, but yet they're getting some prospects like Emmanuel Clase and, several others that have been ready to play right now that is making the team better. And then you got, unfortunately, the dumpster fire with the Chicago White Sox. And then what am I to make about the Minnesota Twins? You look at this at some point, and like we talked about with draft and development, moving some pieces around, I mean, kind of outlook in the AL Central, this is just kind of a division where it's a go either way type division. But could this be something that if all things work right, that the Tigers should be able to take advantage with the way the state of this division is?
If you'd asked me this question, opening day, even the month of April, I'd say sure. But, and I hope I'm wrong on this, but I do think there's enough of a sample size now where Cleveland has clearly established themselves as the favorite, and the brand of baseball that they play seems to work. It's one of those things. Baseball is a very, very strange game. You fail more than you succeed, and for whatever reason, and they've strung it together. They've had solid offense, complementary pitching, and so at this point, I certainly wouldn't bet on anyone outside of the Cleveland Guardians. And again, Kansas City's kind of been an anomaly where all of a sudden, you look up at the standings, they're 10 games above 500. Bobby Witt Jr. has been incredible, playing at a all-star level at the shortstop position, and they invested in him, and they got the good shortstop. We invested in the bum Javi Baez, but that's we've already covered that one, so I won't get too far into it. So I wish I could say, yeah, I really feel good about this Tigers team trying to come back from the 10.5 games that they're down right now to the Guardians, but I'm unfortunately not quite there. Wild card, that's a different story, because right now the Minnesota Twins have the last wild card spot, and I'm not as much of a believer in them. So I don't think we joke about it on Locked On Tigers, which, by the way, you should subscribe. Everybody subscribe. Locked On Sports Detroit. And we say, is it a season is over kind of week, or do we have hope kind of week? So based on the way they've been playing, they're 5-5 in their last 10 games. I just think that's who this baseball team is. So the season's not over, but I also don't have a ton of hope for, some monumental second half resurgence for the Tigers.
Well, and I'm a baseball guy myself. Baseball has definitely ran in my family since I've been in diapers, and I've always been the kind that all you need is a little hope and all you need is a little grit. And that's, ultimately what makes teams that some people kind of, put behind in their shadow, and then all of a sudden they just come out the woodworks. I mean, I said this about the D-backs. I said this about, the Orioles, and now they're in the point where they're basically arguably the best team in the American League. And so hopefully we could see some positivity, and we can definitely see an uprising for this Tigers team. But appreciate your time, Jake. Locked On Detroit, guys. That's where you can like, subscribe, hit the bell button, keep you up to date for all Tiger fans that you need to get everything you need on those Detroit Tigers. Appreciate you, my friend. Have a good rest of your week, man, and we'll see exactly what happens with these Tigers.
All right. Sounds good, Jake. Thanks so much for having me on.
Not a problem.